All right. Well, welcome back to another episode of the Lean In Leaders podcast. Great to have Larry back in studio with me today. So, Larry, welcome.
Good to be back, as I say every time we get back into the studio, Shad. It's been a while, but it's great to see
Yes,
you
sir.
and talk about our important topics around
Yes.
leadership.
Passion for leadership and leadership growth and development. So, I kind of think what we do today is maybe drill down a little bit more, get a little bit more finite, and talk about maybe what skills does a leader need for successful execution. Leaders are notorious for being able to drive missions and make numbers and do all of those things. But what skills do they need to have to be really successful and maybe even more efficient in that execution?
Yeah, so, right, we know that depending on how you explain leadership and you make sense of it in your own world, and if you're talking about competencies and different forms of acumen, we know that you could go 50 different
Yeah.
directions on how people define that.
Yes.
But yes, in context to execution, I like to think of a smaller subset of skills that leaders need to be effective in that context. So I would say that typically I think about somewhere between 5 to 7 that are very top of mind to me. But for our discussion today, I think I'd like to just talk about maybe like 4 or 5 of those
Yeah.
things that I think if a leader could really build strength and acumen around these skills, they're putting themselves in a much better position to lead execution more effectively and feel good about it.
Okay.
So I think the first one is, and this is going to sound, I'm going to explain this. I call it like rallying the team. You might be, oh, it sounds like, the charismatic cheerleader leader. And that's true and it's not true, right? So rallying the team is very important. And that means supporting people. But when it comes to execution, it means being the individual that is talking about vision,
Mm.
talking about directionality, and talking about everything related to execution that even or the pavers before you execute around strategy. So when I talk about rallying the team, I do mean bringing like a positive energy to the team or teams, right? It could be multiple teams. It could be the organization. But if that leader does not know how to generate that energy around direction, they're going to struggle to get momentum. And we all know that when it comes to execution of a strategy, it's like that Collins flywheel effect.
Yeah.
You're putting a lot of energy in the
Get it started.
beginning
Yeah.
to get that baby moving. But once it starts
Right.
moving and it doesn't stop moving. But there's something really important about that. So some of the most important things I think a leader could do is communicate, communicate, communicate. And what are we communicating about? It's about, as it relates to execution, the strategy, the plan, the vision,
The
the
vision.
larger
Yeah. Yeah.
vision.
That's
But
huge.
right? But I would also say, and this is helpful to think in this context too, is like the local vision. So there's this grander vision, but there's also this opportunity for leaders of markets or leaders of teams to talk about what the
Mm.
vision looks like to them as they kind of bring it down to a more local level
Yeah.
to inspire people to get
Yeah.
that movement. So I think that's probably my number one is
So
rallying the team.
rallying the team, but and I think another way to look at that, because I agree, it's sharing the vision and then keeping people aligned with the vision, right? Because when we talk about execution of a plan, we always know there's going to be something there's a roadblock, there's a barrier, there's something that's going to prevent us from achieving that vision and executing on that plan. And that rallying the team is that leader keeping people focused on that end goal, keeping people
Yep.
focused on what that means. And it could be that hierarchical organizational goal where, like you said, how does that local team contribute to that vision and the vision for that team and how they do that? So, yeah, I think that's great. Rallying the team. So it's not necessarily a cheerleader. It could be a cheerleader, but it's rallying them around that unified vision,
Yeah.
that unified plan.
Exactly.
Yeah,
And
cool.
getting momentum. And you opened up the door for what I would say is one of my other number fives. And that is really important. It's clearing the path is what
Yes,
I
yes,
like
yes,
to
yes.
call it. So at the end of the day, when it comes to execution around a strategy and a subset of goals and
Yeah.
initiatives, no one individual is doing it on their own. As a
Yeah.
matter of fact, the individual who is maybe leading the charge in generating that momentum may be doing very little of the
Sure.
work, right?
Yeah.
That's what
Hmm.
we, right? Even if you're a roll up your sleeves leader and that's the kind of job you're in and role you're in, you still have team members who are
Yes.
actually executing
Yes.
on those goals that are aligned to that strategy. So I think one of the most important things to do in terms of building acumen is leaders should be asking themselves, when I talk to my team members, am I asking them and listening for opportunities to remove barriers for
Hmm.
people? And, am I asking them the right questions so that we can expose those
Yeah.
barriers versus just, and I've seen this happen in the past with individuals where the leader has been told to make sure that when you talk to your team members in your one-on-one, ask them if there's anything I can do for you. And it's very performative in nature and it's well intentioned, but it's not enough. This is really about how do I make sure, and I'm not going to do too much of a play on words, but like lean in, right? That's what we
Hmm.
call lean in leaders.
Hmm.
How do I lean in and really listen? This intersects good coaching too. How do I lean in and make sure I'm listening to what is actually being said? Because if I'm not really listening to what's being said when I'm asking how a leader is doing with executing on strategy and goals, I'm not going to be finding those entry points to remove
Yeah.
barriers. And sometimes those barriers are really obvious, and sometimes they're not.
Yeah.
So the leader really has to listen
Yeah.
for those openings so that they can remove those barriers and help people be more effective and do the work they need to do with their teams.
Yeah. Good. Yeah, I think that's great. The way I've kind of done that in my leadership background, right, is not, what do you need from me or how can I help you? I mean, there's almost kind of that placating factor of let me know what I can do to help, right? Which is a passive way of offering help but not really being invested. Rather, turn that question around and make it more person centered, team member centered to say, do I need to do to help you in order to achieve your goal? What's going to keep you from achieving that task? And how can I help you with that?
Right. A
Right?
good,
Because now there's an ask. And then my job is to really listen closely and then make sure I come through with that ask.
yeah, that's great. And that's very important. I mean, again, us both being professional coaches, one of the things we do that we're getting into more core coaching acumen when we're really listening empathically like that
Yeah.
and
Oh,
asking
absolutely. Yeah.
asking like intentional questions.
Yeah. Yeah.
Intentionality,
Yeah.
reigns here, right?
Yeah.
I think a third one though that I would throw onto that is one of my top five is this idea of making decisions. And you could say, wow, well, geez, if you're a good manager or a good leader, you're making decisions, but it becomes more exponential when you talk about making decisions as it relates to strategies and execution, because good strategy is sometimes goes by the wayside in one form or fashion when execution fails, right?
Mhm.
That's a big part of strategy, and where strategy often does fails in the execution phase. And sometimes what I've noticed and I've experienced myself is that sometimes it comes down to having the confidence to make decisions. Even if you have the authority to make decisions, it's modulating this right degree of let me get all my facts straight and but let me not use this saying a lot, not let perfect be the enemy of good. I've got enough perspectives from people. I've got enough people involved. I've got my facts straight. Time to move, make a decision. I know that oftentimes leaders do struggle with having the confidence to just make a decision. And sometimes it comes down to knowing that you haven't, and this has a lot to do with leading transformation and change today, where we might not have all of the information.
Right.
We might not have time to gather every potential fact. And then we know at the end of the day, when we do that, we just get stuck. So I think a strong number three in the leader's role in leading execution is this idea of making a decision with the best information you have available and moving into action and standing by that decision. It doesn't mean that, maybe it wasn't the best decision,
Yeah.
but if, as long as you're doing as much I dotting and T crossing as possible and bringing all the people in for perspectives, you just have to get better and more comfortable at making decisions,
Sure.
especially in the world that we're leading in today, where it moves really quick and there's no way we're going to have all the information. We might not even know what we don't know in certain
Sure.
scenarios.
Yeah, I mean, it's the best educated guess sometimes. And I think you said it right. Even if it's not the best decision or the right decision, or a better option exposes itself once you take action on a decision. Just taking some action and doing so with a degree of confidence that we're just going to try this out. I think this is the right way to go to execute on that plan goes a long way just in moving the ball, right?
Right.
But it may not be moving the ball forward. We may be moving back a little bit. That's okay though. And I tell people lots of times within coaching, even if it wasn't a good decision, you've at least eliminated that option going forward. So it's a positive step, even though it was a negative net result.
Right.
So
Right.
just take
That
action.
good distinction too, because the way you just said that, it made me think that it still may have been the best decision at the time, even if
Yes.
the result, and
Yes.
that's this idea of separating the result from
The
the
decision.
effort,
Yeah.
because it might have been the right effort, knowing that there were variables that impacted that result that just you didn't have control over. So
Yeah.
that's a really
Yeah.
good distinction
And then
too.
we adjust and we decide again and we go. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. Now
Exactly.
move
And
forward.
that's good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's just do one more. We'll do a strong number 4 is this idea of creating discipline around accountability. And I bring that up because it's, again, through the lens of execution, a very important component of the first 3. And I would even challenge us as leaders to be open to redefining the word accountability, because I know that, Shad, when I say that word,
Yes.
the hair on the back of our neck goes up. It just has this sometimes not so
Negative. Yeah.
positive
Mhm.
connotation. It sounds like you're holding others accountable. And it's really this idea of how you help others see the importance of being more disciplined and having more rigor about focusing on those goals and focusing on the direction that you're going as it aligns to the strategy. I do think that the opportunity here for leaders is to make sure they're doing something that I call stepping over, but like, don't step over, right? If you see something, hit it head on and find a way of having that conversation around what you're seeing around results or lack thereof, and
Mhm.
asking people, like, what do you think is going on? Do we
Yes.
need to change direction? And here's where decisions tie back in, because I think people often struggle with having the confidence of saying, we've been tackling this goal with these actions for like 6 weeks now. And I don't think we're moving, even if we're focused on, these lead actions that are more, immediate and influenceable, then, and we're not looking just at the lag goal and the outcomes and the metric, but
Mhm.
we're really focused on actions, but they
Mhm.
still might not turn out to be the right actions. You have to have the courage to say, you know what? And this is part of what accountability means. It means maybe this wasn't the right direction
Yeah.
around the actions. Let's make a decision to change them
Yeah.
and go in a different direction.
Yes.
And that, again, is what will keep the momentum, that flywheel going, versus what typically happens around goals that are connected to and aligned to strategy that don't work, where 8 months go by and the team's looking around at one point in time around the meeting maybe and says, hey, whatever happened with
Yeah.
that body of work that we were addressing, or that goal that you were working on with your team,
Yeah.
Bill, or Bob, whoever it is? And the important thing there is that we just start thinking about accountability not as like this negative, shoulder watching kind of exercise, but really seeing it or thinking about it through the lens of like seeing things through
Yeah. Okay.
and raising and elevating, barriers so that you can course correct, get on track, stay on track, and get that flywheel going again.
Yeah. I think that's great. And kind of how I hear you say that, and you correct me if I'm going down the wrong path here, but kind of what I took from that, it's really an accountability to the decisions you've made, the people you've invested in, and the end goal that you're trying to achieve, and the discipline and that accountability to look at it consistently and look at the others, the role they play in making that work. And if it is working, continue to push the flywheel. If it isn't working, having the courage to go, what isn't working, and how do we tweak, adjust to get back on path for the goal?
Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah. And so I'm going to double down on that one, because what that made me think about is when we think about accountability and what it really means, maybe it would be helpful if we would depersonalize it a little bit and make the accountability around the
Yes.
commitment
Yeah.
to the goals, to the
Yeah.
work, to the strategy, as opposed to this sense of, well, if I'm not being accountable, right away, you
Yeah.
start to think, well, there's like this defense mechanism kicks in. And if we just stay focused around the commitment to each other and the work, and we could de-escalate the personalization of something not working and say, okay, great, it's not working. We all
Yeah.
decided
So
this
now
was it.
what? Yeah.
How
What do
do
we
we,
do? Yeah.
so now what, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's an important, and equally important is for the leader to verbalize what we just said instead of
It's
just change direction, use it as a teachable moment for the team and
yeah.
say,
Oh,
hey, let's
absolutely.
talk about this. Like, we decided this, it's not working. Let's come up with something new. And
Yeah.
I want you guys to realize that we just went through this exercise.
Right.
Let's remember how we got here, because we can learn from that and will help us only get better and move more quickly and,
Yeah.
forward direction.
Well,
So
and that exactly what you just said right there is goes back to step number one is rallying the troops, right, or rallying the team, if you will, in that, hey, it isn't working. And we talk about this, that you and I talk about it a lot, and we probably should do it as an episode at some point. The idea of a leader being vulnerable and how it plays into more engagement. Countless studies show vulnerable, approachable leaders have more engaged people, as long as there's these other steps that go with it, action and accountability. But being able to sit with your team and go, team, what we tried isn't working. Look, that was a good effort. We thought that plan was going to work. Here's the vision. So we got to keep focusing on rallying towards the vision. Where do we go from here? What do you think we try?
exactly. Yeah,
Right. And
exactly. Bring him in.
yeah, that brings so much value to the team to say, I need your opinion. And just because I'm asking your opinion now doesn't mean we're going to do that. But there may be a nugget I can take from that. There might be a whole piece that we can take from that, or you might spark an interest in somebody else's idea that gets us there. Right. And
Yeah.
so that a part about being vulnerable, I think that's an accountability, is just being in a place where you're willing to give. And I talk to my clients all the time about this. People will work for you if they understand the why, which goes back to that rallying the team.
For sure.
Why do we need to do this way? How do you think we can do it this way? How do I have to remove barriers to do it this way? And then how often should we talk about what's working and what isn't working?
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Yeah, I like that.
And it really, all 4 to 4+ of
Yeah.
those degrees of acumen just really connect. And the important thing to just point out here, and you said it, is they are not exclusive.
No,
These are completely
complimentary.
complementary, interconnected skills. So again, what we really talked about, for a quick recap, Chad, we talked about rallying the team, getting people connected around the vision, the goals, whatever it is, but it's really about getting momentum. So that's
Mm-hmm.
number one. We talked about this idea of getting people involved around decision making, expanding your network, um, but being willing to move into action more quickly, because you
Mm-hmm.
have to lead like that today.
Yeah.
It's not enough to sit on a thought or decision for
Yeah.
months. It just doesn't
Yeah.
work. One of the most important roles of a leader, especially around execution, is removing barriers and clearing the path. And the fourth thing we talked about was this idea of maybe redefining accountability, making it not so much about a defensive posture of what's working and not working, but how do we ask ourselves, if we're moving the bar, and if we're not, be willing to make decisions, going back to number 3,
Mm-hmm.
around changing the course, but also being willing to check in around ourselves as individual contributors and team members. And yes, for the leaders to check in and make sure that that momentum continues to be moving in the right direction.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. So I think if you're a leader listening and you want to be able to execute better, it goes back to asking. I think it's just a simple technique, if you will, of maybe asking yourselves those questions. Does my team understand the direction? What have I rallied the troops enough that they know what we're doing and why we're doing it? Have I been able to remove barriers? Or what barriers do I know of? What barriers do I not know of that the team needs removed so that they can accomplish what they need to accomplish? What decisions do I need to act on today to keep us moving towards that vision? And then what do I need to do for myself? And how do I need to interact with others to be accountable towards that vision? I think if you could start asking yourself those questions.
It's reflection.
Yeah,
We've talked
that's all
about
it
this
is.
before.
Yeah.
Actually, when I present this, usually in the form of opportunities where I'm coaching or speaking, I ask people to use these elements of skill building in more of a reflection exercise and say,
Yeah.
we'll challenge people, say like, literally like look in the mirror and
Yeah.
ask yourself, how am I doing rallying my team? And what do I need to do differently? And like really, this is all about self-reflection. And you could use it with your coach or use it to coach yourself, but you have to ask yourself and create the space to check in around these
Yeah.
things. So
Absolutely. That's
absolutely,
excellent.
Shed.
Excellent. All right. Excellent. Well, we'll wrap this one. I think this is a nice little topic on execution and leadership, becoming more effective. Hopefully, if you've gotten to this point, which I'm sure you have, you've appreciated the insight that we've offered here a little bit. If you like the content that we provide, encourage you to like, share, follow, do all those things that people always ask you to do in a podcast, so that we can get out there in front of more people. Share this with others that you know, so that we can get out in front of more people. Our goal here at Lean In Leaders is to provide you tools, ideas, reminders on what it means to be a good leader, and understanding that leadership doesn't end when you've achieved the goal or you've executed on the plan. Leadership never stops, and we never stop growing as leaders. And that's our goal at Lean In Leaders, to help you become a better leader and to help you lean in leader.